Welcome to another chapter podcast with your hosts, Claire and Rebecca.
Do you love books? Well, you've come to the right place. Join us as we discuss all things books. Hi everyone, and welcome to chapter 7 of Another Chapter, the podcast. And today's episode is our second read along, which is the book Paper Cup by Karen Campbell. So just to reiterate, when picking our read-along books, we go in blind. Apart from what's stated in the blurb, we do not know anything about what the topics are within the book. There may be some sensitive topics discussed throughout the course of the podcast, and we hope that the books we choose to read spark many a conversation. Hopefully not just between us, but between you and your friends or family members too.
Both Rebecca and I can only speak from our own experiences and therefore will not be able to make personally informed statements on everything that comes up. All we can offer are our honest opinions and those of our followers who have willingly engaged in discussion around these books. And we want to assure you that anything that's ever said will never come from a place of malice, nor would it ever be our intention to cause offence to anyone. When we set out to make a podcast, we wanted to ensure it was a safe and positive place, and we hope that this comes through to you all as you listen to what we have to say. So, Rebecca, will you go through the way that the read-along works?
Yeah, so for anyone who is maybe new to the podcast or hasn't done a read-along with us before, the way we envision our read-along episodes to work is as follows. So first, we are having, and we'll always have, a spoiler-free section where we tell you who chose the book, why we chose it, and give a very vague outline of what happens in the book. And that is this section. So the second section of the podcast will be separated with a brief little jingle, and after that we get into the details of the books. So this will be full of spoilers. Therefore, if you haven't read the book yet, take this as your advance warning to stop listening when you get to that point.
Rebecca, you chose this month's book. Can you tell us why you chose it?
I did. So, we've said before that we want to make the whole podcast as well as the read-alongs as accessible as possible to everyone. So a big thing is that the books are available at as many places as possible, both to buy and to borrow. When we were deciding for this month, we were trying to figure out what would be available on BorrowBox because that was a very popular option for the Mad Honey. A lot of people either listened to or read it via BorrowBox. So I was kind of having a look on BorrowBox one day to see what caught my eye, and I spotted this book, Paper Cup, which I had never heard anything about before, had a read of the blurb, and I thought, wow, that actually sounds really interesting. And obviously, as one of our criteria is that there will be or should be some kind of hot topics or discussion points within it. It seems like a really good option for that.
And what was interesting was I had actually gone to reserve it beforehand and didn't actually do it for some reason. I don't know, was I overcommitted with my reading? And yeah, so it had caught my attention before, but I just kind of never got around to reading it. So I was delighted when you sent it my way. I was like, this is a good one. Yeah. Have you read any other books by Karen Campbell? Because I know that she's written a couple.
I haven't. I think this was her 8th book. And the first few were, I think, kind of crime dramas or like police procedural dramas. And the last few have been a bit more, let's say, human-based, as in like revolved around people and their struggles.
Human experience.
Yeah, human-based. Seeing as no books are ever about humans.
Yeah.
Anyway, there are one or two in the back catalogue that I think I would like to pick up, having read this. Based off of the descriptions of them. So I'll read the blurb out there, and for anyone that hasn't read it and is maybe intrigued. So, What if going back was the only way of going forward? Rocked by a terrible accident, homeless Kelly needs to escape the cold streets of Glasgow. Maybe she doesn't believe in serendipity, but a rare moment of kindness and a lost ring conspire to call her home. As Kelly vows to reunite the ring with its owner, she must return to the small town she fled so many years ago. On her journey from Glasgow to the southwest tip of Scotland, Kelly encounters ancient pilgrim routes, hostile humans, hippies, book lovers, and a friendly dog. As memories stir and the people she thought she'd left behind forever move closer with every step. Full of compassion and hope, Paper Cup is a novel about how easy it can be to fall through the cracks and what it takes to turn around a life that has run off course. So, Claire, if someone hasn't read this book yet, would you recommend it?
I would. I think it is a bit of a Marmite book in the sense that we know some people really enjoyed it and some people found it more difficult to get into. Personally, I loved the descriptions in the book. They were quite lyrical and poetic, but it also tackles a really, really important subject. It tackles a load of important subjects, to be honest.
Yeah.
The main one being homelessness. But I would, yeah, would you?
Yes, yeah, I would. There were lots of parts of this that I really enjoyed, and I really enjoyed the discussion that came out of it, actually. That was great. So it's one that I think is great to be able to chat to other people about. So yeah, for that, yes. At this point, so we will move into our spoilery section. Jingle will be next. So after that, proceed at your peril. So the general reaction to the book. Most people really enjoyed the book or enjoyed it. Some people it was a 5-star read. Other people maybe not a 5-star read, but I think everybody was able to find elements of it that they thought were worth discussing, that they thought were well done, even if they didn't love all aspects of it. Is that kind of a fair comment?
Yeah, and I think only one person didn't finish it. Do you know, which is not bad really when you consider.
Yeah.
Do you know how many of us put down books and just go, no, I'm not into this. I think it caused an awful lot of us to stop and kind of reflect on our own behaviours and biases. Biases could be a very wrong word there, but
it is.
You know what I mean? Just like, our own...
Yeah, our reactions to people, especially homeless people. Yeah.
Like I found myself in the city and I was looking at people differently compared to how I might have just walked past before, do you know?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So, Rebecca, can you go into a little bit of detail for us? Who's who, what happens, and how are we feeling about it?
Yeah, perfectly. So obviously we have Kelly, who is our protagonist, our main character, and she is living rough on the streets of Glasgow. By chance, one night, a girl who is on her hen in Glasgow ends up on a bench next to Kelly. She's very disorientated and kind of gets a bit of a surprise. She's been separated from her friends, gets a bit of a surprise when she realises Kelly is lying kind of or sleeping on the bench next to her, and in kind of a panic hands Kelly a load of money, and it turns out she has also dropped her wedding ring or her engagement ring as well. So that happening ends up with Kelly deciding that she needs to return the ring, as we know from the blurb, to this girl. So on the way, we meet Dexy, who is a former homeless man who kind of now runs, I suppose, a shelter for people who are also in kind of struggling circumstances. And he's kind of her one friend or kind of contact in Glasgow. And he's very kind and a very good influence. And he clearly cares for her a lot. And then she literally starts walking from Glasgow down to where she knows the girl is from, because the girl has obviously been talking or was talking to her the night of the hen. So on the way, on the journey, she goes to different pilgrimage sites because she ends up kind of inadvertently knocking across this crowd of tourists who are doing like a pilgrim trail down through Scotland. She gets a map from them and follows the trail herself and meets various people on the way, some of whom are lovely and other people who are not so lovely. And she meets a lovely little doggy, Cauliflower, who she saves, and who ends up being like the heart and soul of the story for most people.
Yeah, you gotta love Collie.
So yeah, like there were parts of it that I suppose people felt kind of the pilgrimage part, while it made sense why it happened or why it was included in the story, some people felt there was kind of too much of that aspect. I think everyone loved Cauliflower. and everyone kind of enjoyed like the insights into Kelly's life, but I think some people just felt a little bit maybe not as connected to Kelly as they would have liked or would have expected to feel, which is fine, you know. It's not that necessarily they didn't like her as such, but more that they just didn't, there was just something that they didn't connect with.
Click with, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Which is fair, because we can't connect with everybody too, do you know, like you can't be friends with everybody, so it's only natural that you'll come across characters that you're not necessarily loving.
Yeah.
I've just looked it up there, and it's only a 1-day walk to get from Glasgow to Galloway.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so yeah, because I hadn't actually thought of that before we started recording, but when you had said it there, she actually finds this place, Glenluce and stuff, so maybe it might be a little bit longer, but it's a 2-hour drive, it's a 7-hour cycle, good old Google Maps, so you're talking about a day to get there. If you're walking. So yeah, it's interesting, and like obviously she's got things that come up and things that get in her way, and she's so down en route, so it's I like the idea of the kind of journey myself. I did find that quite interesting. I know we actually have a question further on where we discuss whether the pilgrimage part was actually necessary. I did enjoy it. I think it was very symbolic of her own journey throughout the book. Okay, so some of the hot topics that came up are the things that sparked the most debate in the chats, and obviously our very first one, which kind of took centre stage, was the issue around homelessness. I think Kelly's character and her situation caused an awful lot of us to become quite introspective and think about the way that we have experienced homelessness in our communities and cities and stuff, and it was eye-opening, really. I personally found that bit. That's why I think Kelly was such a good character.
Yeah.
I really enjoyed her. I liked her. I enjoyed her sense of humour. I think that she was more than just a homeless person, if that makes sense. She had a lot of substance, and I think that allowed me to kind of question things myself. Like, do people have these backstories that I've never even considered? Do we make judgments as to how people wound up where they did?
Yeah, I thought it was really well done. And actually, even from like the group chats, there were a few people in the chat who had worked within, we'll say, services related to homeless people in various places, and found it was done very well, which was great. And obviously it was the whole purpose of it, or by and large, was to make us think. And you know, the situations where the people are walking past Kelly and are like unwilling to look her in the eye, and you're reading it going, oh my god, how many times have I done that? Yeah. Or, you know, deliberately kind of walked at the other side of the path because you're obviously not afraid of the people sitting down on the ground, but you don't want to engage. And how awful is it, you know? The fact we looked at ourselves,
it's quite confronting, I think, because it makes us question our privilege. You know, like, we've all been in situations where we've like had to, I mean, particularly now more than ever before, like we're watching the purse string, things are very tight for people, and you know, it's a problem that is never too far removed, I suppose, unless you are living the life of luxury. But it's it's confronting as a topic to read and to discuss. Yeah,
but it's also something that is too easy for a lot of us to
ignore
if we want. Yeah. Which is what this book makes you think about.
Yeah, and we got some great comments in from people about the topic of homelessness. Let me just have a look here. So someone mentioned that Karen Campbell's explanations of the complicated systems of welfare and support really made you think. It's so complicated, and there's a lot of layers for each person in similar situations.
Someone else said, I think that Campbell has a really impressive grasp of all the issues around homelessness, a book which is an ideal pick for a class or book club discussion, but took quite a sledgehammer approach at times when communicating them. As a novel, it could have used a bit more subtlety in places, but on the flip side, it made a very accessible read.
Yeah, and what's interesting is like Karen Campbell was a police officer, so maybe like she is probably more exposed to the harshness of this topic. So subtle might not necessarily be a thing that she wanted to even consider. Like, you know,
Yeah.
the homelessness can be something that you're kind of all in when you're looking at it, or you're looking the other way. You know, you take your pick.
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm just taking a look here now. Some of them are quite similar to what we've said already. There's one here. I found this one a really interesting comment. I also appreciated the author including points about how you can't be homeless in the countryside and how cashless societies have affected homeless people, but also the struggles Kelly had when she was given too much money.
Yeah.
I found that very interesting too. Like, she didn't know how to cope when she had too much money. And there's a quote here from the book: "Spare any change does not work so well in a world that is cashless and slick." Like, what are people meant to do? Have a card machine handy? Do you know, like, I don't carry cash anymore. And I noticed that recently when I was in the city and someone did ask for money and I had nothing to give, and I was like, I actually don't carry cash. Like, we're not, charity isn't as accessible when you're not carrying cash in your pocket, I think, sometimes.
And for people whose whole lifeline is that cup or hat or whatever it is that they're hoping that money will be put into, for nothing to be put into it, like, is huge, you know. So someone else said that they listened on audiobook and the narration was brilliant and really added to the story. It was heartbreaking and really showed how hard she tried, she being Kelly, and how easily people can lose their way and the systems in place to help don't. I know there are amazing people out there helping, but I think this book shows that the people you meet in life can be a coin flip of good or bad and can determine the course of your life. And that was a major aspect of this, actually, like the services that were available to her, but just because they were available to her does not actually mean they were worthwhile or doing what they should be.
Yeah, there's a quote here, "It's too confusing. The agencies and the charities, the support workers and social, and the dole and the food banks. Would it not just be easier if one big group sorted the lot? Then there'd be one big safe net instead of hundreds of wee frayed ones which frequently don't join up." And I think we saw that an awful lot in the book, that Kelly, like, it's like people were assuming that someone else was taking care of this problem or doing that, and the other.
Or that the person working in a service has ticked the box of, oh, well, I've met that person and I've told them this, I've given them this information, I've suggested this to them, I have told them that they are or aren't following the rules, therefore my hands are tied, so my job is done. There was an awful lot of kind of hand washing of responsibility, it felt.
And it can be quite cold. But I would assume that, like, you can't go into a job and wear your heart on your sleeve constantly, and I suppose you would build up some kind of a hard exterior if you're in the job a long time. And, like, how many times would you have gone home crying to somebody about what you'd witnessed? So perhaps these are people who, like, are worn out. There are different aspects to different stories, but it did obviously come across that they were being extremely, I don't want to say cruel, but cold in their approach to someone who genuinely just needed compassion.
Yeah. It was too emotionless to take. Like,
yes,
everybody's situation is different and everybody's needs are different, and having to follow everyone fits in one box and has to follow one approach. It can't work. Like, it can't work.
Yeah.
So
I think across society in general, you could say that, because, like, we've had a bit of a discussion online, thanks to Aoife, actually, who was on our last episode, about just the education system and how things aren't built to cater for everybody. Like, there's just different elements of society that so far we've all been pushed into this one box when necessarily we're not all fitting, and things need a bit of an overhaul. So it's just interesting that this has come up in another way, I suppose.
Yeah.
We've got another one or two comments here that we've pulled from the chats. The first one is, I think I said already, but the book definitely made me think about how I am when I see someone lying on a doorstep. I always have empathy, but I don't really do anything except walk on by quickly, avoiding eye contact. I know I can't save the world, but I'm curious to know how I'll feel next time. Yeah, and speaking from experience, this book has changed how I felt the next time I passed someone on a doorstep, definitely. And then someone actually gave us a comment about experiencing someone in their very close quarters, I suppose, struggling with homelessness. There was a homeless man sheltering on the hallway in the apartment blocks we used to live in years ago. We had just had dinner, so hubby brought out for him some spag bol. I felt bad we never offered for him to come in, and the management told him to go away the next morning. I feel even worse now that we didn't do more at the time. Do you know, like, we saw Kelly in this book, and we saw that at times when she was being helped and being helped in a very kind and generous way and genuine way, she struggled to accept it. She didn't feel like she was worth it. Do you know, so there are these blurry lines.
Yeah, yeah. And again, like what is okay with one person may not be okay with the next person. So again, like it's just that idea of not assuming that everybody who is homeless is the same and that everybody wants the same treatment. So it's actually interacting with the people themselves is the important thing, is the big takeaway I took from this. Like one of the other hot topics that came up was kind of the whole idea of judgment, which ties in very closely to obviously the issue itself. And one comment that we got, which ties back in about the services, was, I found the end of chapter 14 interesting as someone who's worked in homeless services. The key worker talking to her about potential options of where to live, but giving out to her for not engaging. We found out about Kelly's self-harm, her suicide attempt, and the woman is pushing her to engage, and all Kelly wants is a toothbrush. They just ignored her request of something so simple and something they probably had on hand to give her. A complete missed opportunity to build trust and a relationship. Also on the topic of personal hygiene, she talked before as well about how menstruation products were never being in sanitary packs, which is such an important point. A quote from the book then was, so stripped are you of your humanity that a more appropriate person than you must decide if your menstrual blood deserves catching. And we know well, how that works. But to be basically told that, sorry, you don't get to decide, you don't get access to such a basic necessity because of your circumstances is horrendous, And it's something that, again, I never thought about, never crossed my mind before reading this.
You'd kind of assume that that's a given, like regardless of who you are, your circumstances or whatever, that you'd get that. And I mean, only a few weeks ago, I was out for a walk somewhere and I went into a bathroom facility and they had like boxes of pads, tampons, everything that you could possibly need should you find yourself in a situation where you were stuck. They were all there just free for the taking, and it was lovely to see. And I know that they're doing that in colleges, and they're doing it in like institutes of further education. There was also a conversation had about these products being taxed, or even the fact that we have to pay for them when we didn't sign up for what we need them for, So like it's just this whole idea of why is she not automatically given something that she needs to keep herself clean and hygienic. It's actually very upsetting. Like, I can't imagine turning around to anyone and going, no, sorry, you don't get this.
Yeah. It's not like anybody could argue that she did not need it. Like, there was no argument against giving them to her. Like,
she's not hardly going to be lying about the fact that she needs them. Do you know what could you possibly do with these products apart from use them for what they're meant to be for? So it's confusing. Like, they're not weapons. Like, I don't understand what the problem is.
Yeah, but it's the power. It's like, it just feels like a pure power move that, oh, well, sorry, it's infuriating. Like, it's infuriating. And again, it's something else actually that has crossed my mind since. I was like, geez, especially if you met a woman, around the city, homeless, like, should we maybe be offering to get her those kinds of things? Is that something that would be worthwhile chatting to that person about. Like, do they need
Yeah.
provisions like that? So it's another thing to keep in mind.
That's a fair point. There's another one that came up on the topic of judgment, another quote that we've taken from the chats, and it's, a lot of the people that Kelly interacts with don't see her as a person. And I think that this can be a common experience for people experiencing homelessness. So it's important to have characters like Kelly that everyone can relate to and see how easy it can be to end up in her position. Which I personally completely agree with. I think it's relatable. Yeah. And there's a quote then where we can see just how people react to her. A youth bangs into her, opens his mouth. He has an apologetic cast to his face. Then he sees who he has jostled and flinches. So it was like he was going to say sorry, but then saw who she was or what she was and just went, oh, I don't even need to apologise. Do you know? So
you're not even deserving of that from me. Like, that is...
And that's what we're getting at here. Like, people, like, she isn't deserving of menstrual products. She isn't deserving of apologies. She's been, you know, people have urinated on her for the crack.
Oh my God,
Like, she's beaten about the place. She's judged if she asks for money for something. Like, it's just this constant superiority complex that people seem to have when they come in contact with her. Not everybody, because as we know, there's an awful lot of lovely characters within the book too, but it does make you think, like, if you were on the receiving end of this much judgment on a daily basis, like, your self-esteem, like, would just be shattered. You wouldn't deem yourself worthy of any help anyway. So, like, it's just... Yeah, it's eye-opening, really, this conversation.
No wonder she was pushing people away, because, like, obviously, as we saw in the book, she was estranged from her twin sister, Mans, and her own, like, her family. You know, we found out that her dad had been trying to write to her, or had been writing to her for many years, and basically she had been ignoring the communication, and, like, that part where she admits that she suspected he had passed away because the letters had stopped coming is heartbreaking. Like, you know, it... So she put up this wall around her because, like, she went away from Galloway because of hurting her sister. And obviously she went to prison for the assault, and kind of kept herself away then lest she, you know, hurt anyone again, but then couldn't leave anyone in case they hurt her either. And so she ends up in this horrendously lonely life.
Yeah, and it's interesting just the way that, like, she clearly, like, it's self-flagellates so much that there's no need for this extra layer of judgment and admonishment from society.
That's it. So, she's hard enough on herself without all the rest of us doing it to her as well. But just actually about the kindness and honesty, that was one nice, you know, that was a really important aspect to this. I think you said it earlier before we started recording, Claire, that, like, this book was a good way of showing the comparison or the contrast between the people who are very cruel to her and the people who are very kind to her.
Yeah.
And just how polarizing that can be.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting is that for me, I remember the kind acts more so than the cruel ones when I leave this book and when I'm talking about it. Like, obviously some of the cruelty that occurs, you can't but remember it. But I just think that it's very redeeming to have such kindness shown to anyone. And I think it's, like, the world needs kindness.
And it is surprising. Like, I suppose that's part of what struck me when I was reading the incident, and I was surprised that people had gone out of their way to be so kind to her, which says a lot about maybe my expectations of what people were going to do to her or how they were going to treat her. That when people were kind to her, I was like, oh, okay, great, you know. But there was a surprised element to it first, which isn't great
and
either.
There's definitely a layer of protectiveness that comes along with reading about Kelly at the start, you know, because you do hear an awful lot about the things that have happened to her. And I think when someone is like, oh, come into my house, you're kind of going, oh God, it's like watching a horror. Like, you're kind of going, I don't know if you should go in there. I don't know if you're doing the right thing, because you just don't know what to expect. And it is always like this sigh of relief when it is someone being just a decent human being.
Yeah. Like one of the things people said in the chat was, I don't normally like so many minor characters being included in a story, but I think it suited this story perfectly. The idea of how the smallest interactions can really affect someone's day, particularly when you are homeless and life and daily interactions move at such a different pace.
As we were saying, it's causing us to look at ourselves and what we would do potentially. And I think this lady actually said this quote from the book: I think if we all put something in the kindness bank, it's an investment, isn't it? Maybe it will be there when we need it. We all need kindness. I thought that was really beautiful. And I loved the snippets of like proper life lessons that were interspersed in this narrative. Like, you can learn a lot from reading this book.
Yeah.
You know, whether you love it or whether you don't, it's going to stick with you, which I actually think is a great sign of a book. It's a long lasting thing.
If we're talking about kindness and like the nicer parts of the book, we can't not talk about Collie.
Oh.
Yeah, so the unconditional love and the therapeutic value of animals was another lovely takeaway from this book. So one person said the cauliflower is such a good addition and gave Kelly, a reason to keep going and to pull herself up, especially after the pub episode. So for anyone that has read the book, you'll know someone does not take no for an answer when they're asking like who wants a drink, and Kelly, in fairness to her, keeps saying she just wants a lemonade, and basically someone spikes her drink. They buy her alcohol without telling her, give it to her without telling her. Kelly realises, and then there's this moment where she's, will I, won't I, and she does. She drinks it, and it turns into this very messy scene. Very hard to read scene. Not pleasant at all. But then there is, you know, when she wakes up in the bathroom and realises it's storming outside and that she has left cauliflower outside, and then there's this utter panic of her trying to find where poor Collie is gone.
Oh God.
Like that scene is the one I will never forget.
Yeah. I'm going to just cut across you and jump back there to a hot topic of addiction, which we skipped that when we went down, but they're both connected to this particular scene,
Yes,
the two quotes that we've taken from the chats. So one person just said, I got so annoyed with the person who ignored her wishes to drink just soft drinks and got her alcohol instead. So ignorant. I felt Kelly had so much love to give but was misplaced by the alcoholism. The evening in the pub, I was scared for her and cauliflower. I didn't know how it was going to turn out. And I think for me, what I took from that was just the fact that, particularly in Ireland, like we're a drinking country essentially, and if you're not drinking, you're either pregnant or you're, you know, on your deathbed essentially. Like we don't tend to take antibiotics. We don't tend to take no for an answer when we're like, go on, like have a drink. So this is something that we don't actually, I've never considered. If someone says that they don't want to have a drink, I've never thought they could potentially have an issue around drink. And, you know, stop pushing it on them, Claire, you know?
Yeah.
So, yeah, the addiction thing was very interesting. But I love how cauliflower, if we can jump back to the dog, and I'm sorry now because I'm bouncing about the place, he kind of gave her a reason to cop on, essentially. And there's another quote here. Collie really gave her a sense of purpose. This is a quote from the chat. There was a few different points where she talked about the concept of time while living on the streets, basically trying to waste time, not eating, and what to do after giving back the ring, but constantly coming back to Collie. Collie added some structure, even seemed to encourage her to eat more as well, because she was thinking of, oh, Collie must be hungry, rather than ignoring her own needs. I know this part wasn't discussed in the book, but just something to add. Homeless people in Ireland who have a dog often do so for the company, but also if they are begging, people are much more inclined to stop and give them money. Most people care more about the welfare of the animal than the human. That's an interesting point.
That is. Yeah.
Yeah.
Having cauliflower around, even just the fact that she had to take care of him, but then also the emotional connection and that relationship, that it made such a drastic difference to Kelly's life. which is lovely.
Yeah.
Which is lovely.
We don't deserve dogs, really.
No, we don't. We don't. So, some of the polls. First one. Did you feel this book gave you an interesting image of Scotland? 88% of people said yes, and 12% said no. Did you like the pilgrimage aspect of the story? Yes, 55. No, 43. Which is not 100%.
That's not. I honestly hit
We
the
lost. We lost. We lost a couple of people there along the way.
I'm not good with numbers, so I didn't even realise that.
Oh, God. Well, at least we realised it now that it's not someone writing in girls 55 and 43. So yeah, the 2% are on the pilgrimage and have not decided yet
Whether they like it or not.
Yeah. Oh, right, okay. So then I have to move on to a serious question. Were there parts of this story which made you feel uncomfortable? So 11% of people said most of it made them feel uncomfortable. 78% said certain parts, yeah. And then 11% said no, none of it made them feel uncomfortable.
I'm looking at all of these now going, do these all add up to 100? Another one that we asked you was, did the wide range of secondary characters work for you in this story? 49% of you said that yes, you enjoyed everyone. 38% said that it just about enjoyed the range of secondary characters, and 13% said that it wasn't for them. Then, did you enjoy the ending of the story? This was an interesting one too. So 55% said, yeah, it fitted the story overall. 33% said, I'm not sure, to be honest. And 12% of you said that you didn't think it worked. Then we asked, just for our own curiosity, really, how you read the book. 63% of you said you used an audiobook. 32% used an ebook, and 5% used a physical book. I really enjoyed the audiobook. The narrator is absolutely fantastic. She was brilliant.
So the last kind of question we asked people then, and this is what we're going to be doing at the end of every read along, is we're going to pick one burning question, and that we're going to put that one question to everyone and ask what their response to it is. So this time around, our burning question was, if you could ask the author, Karen Campbell, anything, what would you ask her? So we might go through a few of those there, Claire.
Do you know what? I actually think we could do one better and just ask Karen Campbell herself. What do you think?
So actually, just before we get into the questions themselves, like, we were both interested, I suppose, kind of how did you get into writing first day? Because we're all interested in that. And tell us a bit about yourself.
Okay, well, it's lovely to be on. I'm beaming in from not sunny Galloway at the moment in the southwest of Scotland. It's pretty miserable. It's been bleak all day. So I get into writing in a pretty convoluted way. Because before I was a writer, I was a police officer, which is why the first 4 books are about the police. But I always sort of say that I think probably the police was more of the aberration on my journey, because I did English at university. And I kind of got scunnered with books. By the end of studying books, because I love books, and that's why I did English, I thought, I want to do something practical. Taking the magic out a wee bit of I think when you take the back of something to see how it works, it kind of just spoils it a wee bit. And that's how I'd felt about books by the end of doing a degree in English. Not to put folk off doing a degree in English, but so anyway, I ended up joining the police for no other reason than my dad was a cop and my mum had been a cop. And I think when you're rooting about for, you don't know what to do, sort of a young age, you suddenly gravitate towards what you think, And I also thought, well, no 2 days will ever be the same. And in the police, if I don't know what I want to do, it's the kind of job where you've got variety and excitement. But, very quickly I realised you can be book smart, but it doesn't mean you've got any street smarts. And I could literally walk past crimes happening and somebody did. It was one of those jobs that... saying you're a cop and the thought of it, but the reality, the two things, the two worlds were not great. But having said that, later on, coming back to my love of books and writing and ended up being a writer, having been a cop, it's for the psychology of how people work, of how folk can be so, there's now as strange as folk. In different situations, people behave in ways you just can't imagine. You get the nicest of folk in the grimmest of situations. Anyway, I was a cop for nearly 6 years, had a couple of kids, my husband was a cop as well, and sort of juggling policing and children just didn't really work for me. And also, as I say, I was a crap cop, so it was a good excuse. and and so my first 4 books were very much about, I kind of bridle when they were described as crime, and that's how they were marketed. And I totally get that, because it's, from a crime fighter to crime writer, that was, the sort of PR shtick, which, makes sense. But I wanted to try and write about what it really, really felt like to be 20 years of age, in uniform, being let loose in Glasgow on a Saturday night, and terrified, not with the violence, but with the thought of they've put me in charge.
Yeah.
I'm the same idiot I was like 2 weeks ago. Obviously, get training. They don't just let you loose. But, that sense of that responsibility at a young age. So that was the sort of thing I wanted to write about. So those 4 books, and then the subsequent 4 I've written, I don't think they're hugely different, because they're all about the layers of life that coexist and live side by side. They're about that sense of we're all in our own wee sort of bubble. We've all got a facade over us, and what you see in the surface, whether it's a uniform, whether it's the face of a refugee, whatever, that's not the whole person. That's a tiny wee, and usually it's our prejudice, the person we're seeing, we think we know. So those were always the sort of issues I wanted to explore in my writing when I was a young cop. And as I say, seeing the back streets, the lanes your mum tells you not to go down, that it's your job to go down, and check property and things like that. And you see a netherworld, you see people that you didn't, or you maybe did know existed. I mean, I wasn't that naive, but you kind of don't have to deal with. And then seeing those same people night shift after night shift, and various cops, older cops, they always try and take probationers under their wing as a tutor you, but you were always getting different stories from cops about, oh yeah, so and so, they used to be a doctor, or telling you about the sort of downfall of some of the homeless folk you might see. And I'm not sure if those things were made up. Some of them were probably not true, but the sense I always got was everybody had a story. That wasn't what they wanted to be when they were wee, and those are real people, and they, a bit like writing, they exist before that moment you see them. They exist off that page and on the other side of wherever you put the frame of their story. And that's true in fiction as it is in life.
Sometimes it's very easy for us to kind of not think about these things if they're not directly impacting us, which is a very privileged way to be, of course, but that is unfortunately the way things are.
If you acknowledge that these things are there and that these are real people, and circumstances have brought them there, it's not the, well, you should have worked harder and you wouldn't have ended up in the gutter sort of approach. It makes it, and I was trying to do this with the book too, it makes it not impossible that could be you, that the safety net we think is there in society to catch us. When you don't have to use it, it's lovely to think it's there. But see, if you start to get on the slippery slope, whether it's through addiction or falling behind in your rent or combination or, ill health, whatever, it's awful hard once you start to slip.
Yeah.
And then you think, nothing's actually going to catch me. And I think sometimes we, and I talk about society generally, just, you kind of don't want to acknowledge that it's not necessarily somebody's fault they've ended up that way. It's life, and we all live life, and there, but for the grace of God, we might all go.
Yeah. Especially the fact that her father, the fact that he was writing to her continuously, and that, towards the end, obviously, we find out he had passed away, and that she had guessed that was the case because he had stopped writing, was awfully heartbreaking. But at the same time, the fact, that she had a family who, at least one member, was actively trying to keep in contact with her the whole time. It's not like everyone just forgot about her. It's not like she wasn't educated. No. As you said, it could be, in theory, it could be any of us.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm glad, though, that you enjoyed spending time with Kelly, because I wanted to give her a kind of rich internal monologue, because I figured, well, if you are on your own a lot, and even as a writer, I find, you do have wee kind of conversations to yourself sometimes. Yeah. But I wanted her to have humour and resilience, and she ended up, she was one of those characters that kind of almost walked onto the page and said, all right, I'm here. She had obviously I created her, but sometimes characters just kind of create themselves. And this humour that came out of her was brilliant, because I haven't really written a book that's got that. I mean, there's humour in my books, but not to the extent that I think Kelly is quite a funny person to spend time with. And that was kind of her. I don't know how, but it just happened that she, I mean, there's a scene in the book where she pretends to be French just so she can out an awkward conversation. I don't know why that happened, but it actually, although it was quite a funny scene and it talked about her wanting to push people away, it also, sometimes serendipitous things happen in writing, and it allowed me to let Kelly, she's kind of coming back into the world. She's kept the world at bay. And that scene where she is pretending to be French and she's been picked up, she's hitchhiking by a couple who are Scottish. And they are doing what all Scots do when it's a tourist is, and I'm sure Irish people do it as well, but I know you do because I was in Ireland just back in October. You tell folk about the place because you're so proud of it. And so she's hearing about her country reflected back through somebody else. And that couldn't have happened if she wasn't pretending to be someone else. So, and also I think humour just, again, it's about this light and shade. You don't want to give somebody a really hard time in a book. You want there to be a space for folk to absorb what you said and enjoy it and feel connected with the character.
Yeah, and actually one of the questions that the readers that we read along with had was there any particular person or what was the inspiration as such for Kelly?
The whole book initially wasn't going to be about homelessness. I wanted to write about vulnerability. That was really, and it was before COVID, so I can't even say that that's what triggered it. I don't know why. Just sometimes you just get a sense of this is a thing I want to explore, and so the more I started to think about vulnerability and someone who was a bit apart from society, a homeless person seemed the most. You can't be more vulnerable than not having a roof over your head, and then being a woman again would make you even more vulnerable on the streets. And then around that, you've always got to try and find a key into your character, especially the more I've moved away from the world I know in terms of the police. But we're all human and you experience the world as a human being. So the first thing I wrote was the scene, and it's quite near the start, where Kelly's waking up in a skip. She's had a hangover and she's been partying. But the way I approached that was because I was conscious that if I want to write about homelessness, I can research about the sorts of ways folk can fall through the net. I can research about the sort of support that might be there. But in terms of how it feels, I've got no business sort of going up to a homeless person saying, "Tell me, I'm researching a book." It's exploitative, it's voyeuristic, and if I've got any creative bones in me, I should be able to try and think, how might that feel? So I just took it from, how does it feel in the morning? How do I feel in the morning? That point where you wake up and you're a wee bit disorientated, you're coming to, you're not quite sure where you are, and then you stretch and the bed's soft and comfortable and you relax into it and you think about getting up and getting your warm dressing gown on. What if that's in reverse? What if you're dreaming of something warm and soft and then you start to wake up and you feel hardness and coldness and the cardboard you're wrapped in is damp, and it starts to dawn that the thing you were dreaming about isn't your reality. And so I began to write that, and then I had to work out how she got there in the first place and where she was going after that. So it was just those wee steps that I began to sort of create Kelly. And after that, like I say, she just kind of led me to some degree. I mean, I did obviously, people that I've worked with like professionally in the past, I wanted very much for her not to be a victim as such, that she had resilience, that she had a reason, or she made her world make sense to her in terms of, if she doesn't have anyone in it, then nobody can hurt her, that there's these barriers. And so the opportunities and the help that might come her way, she pushes back on them all the time. And she tells herself she's happier that way. And so that gives you a texture and spikiness to work with. And then you have to start thinking, why is she damaged? So what she was running away from and what you learn in flashback as she's making her journey, I kind of wasn't 100% sure what that would be at the start. And it began to evolve as the character of Kelly evolved.
That's really interesting, actually, because I would, I would think that if I were to write, I'd want to be very confident myself in the character that I'm creating, so that I can stand over her. But as you said, she is a very, I don't want to say in your face kind of a character, but she her presence, she makes herself known. And if she did walk off the page like that, then there's no denying that, like that's the kind of person she is. And I really enjoyed her as a character myself. And I loved her resilience and her kind of her bared teeth at times and stuff. And I really loved the ways in which we saw her fall as well too, because I think, and I'm just going to go a little bit off topic here, the scene where she's in the pub and she joins the group for the pub quiz, and she is so determined that she's just going to have a lemonade. I'll just have a lemonade. And eventually, like, someone else gives her a vodka. For me, it really made me think about the fact that we don't always look at alcohol in the same light when it comes to addiction as we do with harder substances, in inverted commas there. And that people can kind of go, well, if I can have a drink and I'm not addicted to it and I can control myself, then what's wrong with that person over there? It was a harrowing scene, I think, at the end of it, really, especially when she was running out and looking for cauliflower and oh God, just that sense of responsibility, which was great for her in the end, but it was heartbreaking, I found.
I think all our hearts broke reading that.
Oh God, yeah, that was horrific. Like up to then, she kind of didn't have much of a sense of purpose apart from giving the ring back, but the dog took over that. As the pilgrimage went on, she felt like this was a bigger thing than just doing this for her, which was lovely.
Definitely. But I think we've all been there, haven't we? Like we've all had nights where you've woken up and thought, oh my God, I shouldn't have done that. Or, so again, I just kind of stretched that, Friday night before the first glass of wine and you feel great. And then I thought, what if you'd not had that feeling for so long because you know how bad it is? So there's a transgressiveness attached to it, and you just go crazy because you're hating yourself as it's happening. So there's that additional layer. It's not just about pleasure; it's about punishment and pain and knowing the reckoning, but just doing it anyway. So that there's always something that a writer can find in your own experience that you can hopefully tweak and pull along to where you want your character to be.
Yeah, it was very well written because, like, as Rebecca said, we all felt it. It packed a punch, that scene, definitely.
Thank you.
Another question that we had for you, and you kind of tipped on it there, is what kind of research was involved around the topic of homelessness? So you obviously had experience dealing with it from a professional perspective, but did you do much research with, charities and stuff like that? Or
I did. I had a really useful book that I mentioned at the back of the paper cup, and it's called Righting Welfare Wrongs by the Scottish Unemployed Workers Network. And that was a book that they had compiled. Basically, they did sort of advocacy work in like job centres in Dundee and things like that. And it was just getting that day-to-day grind of people who were getting sanctioned for being 5 minutes late for an appointment and then losing money, not being allowed to speak to somebody, having to take a wee token and sit in a queue rather than be treated as an adult, all those sorts of things. So that was a really good source of just that kind of low level, nothing too dramatic, but just how poverty and feeling you don't have a voice makes you be ground down and become more vulnerable to the point that if someone else isn't advocating on your behalf, you maybe just give up sometimes, and it's easier to not engage with the system. And in terms of homeless people, I did a project with a group of homeless people that had been homeless, and they were also in rehab for some addiction issues. And it was I was there to do creative writing workshops with them. And I'd written most of Paper Cup by then, and I was very conscious that I didn't want to appropriate people's lives. I didn't want to, let us say, so tell me what it's like to be homeless. But I wanted to just check if I was on the right track in terms of things like Kelly's resilience. And there was, some really beautiful writing that came out of that. One chap wrote a poem about his paper cup, and that is where the title came from, because it was about this vulnerability, about something that's so throwaway but can contain the world literally for you. It can give you a good day or a bad day, but it's also, it's like, it's a marker. You're putting that out into the world and saying, I need your help. And that's a really brave thing to do. And it's also making you really vulnerable. And the bit about the chap that puts the panini in the bin, you know, the guy who wrote this poem, he was talking about how folk will come and put their fag out in your paper cup. They'll deliberately push it over. He said people won't say what in it, pee in it, and things like that, set it on fire, deliberately humiliating you that wee bit more, which I had never ever thought of. So that was, I think it's always good. And I did this when I wrote the refugee book as well. And I work with refugees and asylum seekers. It's much better to listen to folks' experiences than go with your own preset questions, because you'll never get those sorts of things if you never thought to ask. Do folk, bully you on the street? But oh my goodness, they do. So that's a sort of tribute to him and that group is just the name Paper Cup, because it said so much to me about vulnerability, resilience, bravery, and humility, kind of all in one object.
It's lovely to know that it is kind of a tribute to someone in particular. That's really nice. Okay, so the next question was, where do you imagine that Kelly would be in 10 years' time?
I don't know if I want to imagine. I deliberately wanted the book to finish on a positive but ambiguous note where she doesn't even know where she might go next. There's options for her, and there's a resolution, within her family that she didn't have before. And I think a huge weight of guilt and yearning, and it's probably not been removed ever because it's inside her, but it's been eased hugely. And I quite like not planning what's going to happen next to my characters. The book about the Somali refugee that I wrote, it's called This Is Where I Am. Again, it ended at a point where a whole new chapter of their life is beginning. And quite a few people said, oh, are you going to write a sequel? And I didn't want to, because I like the sort of stories that you're still thinking about after you've closed the page. And I think there can be a danger if you tie everything up in a bow. Well, that's that done. And you forget those people, that they're not still walking on after the book is shut. But what I did do in Paper Cup is Dexy actually appears in the book about the refugee. Oh. And so he kind of tapped me on the shoulder, and I thought, yeah, well, you were homeless. You were a big issue seller in that book. It would make sense if you have had a chance to get out of where you were, that you are now helping other homeless people. So by doing that, it allowed me and anyone that had read that book to have a sense of where his story might be. And also he actually references the Somali refugee, Abdi, just a line. So again, if you didn't know, it doesn't matter, but he talks about Abdi. I would like to hope that she's happy and settled somewhere, but she's had so many missteps that I wouldn't want to say, because it would make it a wee bit glib as well. I think it's always hard to know where to end a story. Because,
I think the fact that she had options was a powerful ending. Yeah. As opposed to previously, at the start of the book, she was very much stuck in one place in a really desperate life, whereas the fact she had options was fantastic.
And possibly might be more hopeful now and see that there's potential in these options, as opposed to shutting them down and just point blank refusing.
Yeah, because she's had a chance to be a bit more self-reflective and also connect with human beings again and animals, and it's made her think the world isn't as crap and horrible and cruel as she was telling herself it was.
Yeah. The next question that actually, well, I'm going to skip one of them, but one question that came in just while we're on the subject of Dexy is, do Kelly and Dexy get together? They share a kiss at the end, don't they? Am I right?
Yeah. Well, again, I'm not going to say, because I would like the reader to think that might happen. And Dexy is saying to her to come back to Glasgow, but she's with her sister, and she's not been with her sister for so long, and it's another option.
I was very fond of him. He really was such a caretaker, wasn't he, of a character? And, even when people were looking for Kelly, he was very much trying to mind her when she wasn't, when he had no idea where she was. It was just, it was really lovely, because I think for me, it showed that Kelly was very self-deprecating and thought the worst of herself, and assumed that everybody else thought the worst of her too. And I think we can all be quite guilty of that, of assuming that we know what people are thinking about us. But in the background, there are people that have our backs and that only speak positively of us. And that could surprise us if we were to hear it. So it was lovely to see that somebody had her back.
Such a good heart and wants the best for people in his own and sort of endearing but slightly scary way. And I love that.
The idea for the pilgrimage, was that always going to be part of the story? Like, was that something that you had in mind from the start? I know you were saying the whole thing developed as it went on. Or how did that come about?
It was something that there were sort of two things. I wanted to write about vulnerability, and I also was keen to write about this area in Scotland, Galloway, because I'm from Glasgow originally, but we've moved down here about 10 years ago. So, it's completely the opposite of Glasgow. It's very rural. It's basically nobody comes here unless you're getting the ferry from Stranraer over to Ireland. It's right. Even other Scots don't really, because it's kind of a sticky out wee bit. It doesn't go anywhere. And so I kind of wanted to write a bit of a love letter to Galloway. So that there was going to be a road trip element in it, certainly. But I also, as an outsider coming here, and we kind of moved here on a bit of a whim. I've learned so much about the place, and it's really rich with history and, sort of cradle of Christianity in Scotland and things like that. And I just thought it's maybe an opportunity if I had this kind of pilgrimage thing. Obviously, there's that undercurrent of redemption for Kelly, which a pilgrimage, is a metaphor for. But it also allowed me to have the sort of guidebook idea and that sense of showing off this place and how important it used to be. And again, I just did it because we live here and I want to shout its praises. But it's amazing how things knit together in a book, because it started to feel that the place was reflective of Kelly. It's a wee forgotten place, but it was something at one time and folk should know about it. So, it could have been set in any place and it didn't necessarily have to be a pilgrimage, but those things kind of wove together, I think, and just strengthened the themes that I wanted to look at.
Yeah, and the descriptions of Galloway and stuff were absolutely stunning. I think the language of your descriptions was so poetic, and so I just really, really relished them, and just the really long descriptions with a very short sentence afterwards describing how Kelly's feeling in that moment. And sometimes it was the polar opposite of the beauty that was being described, and it just showed this absolute contrast between her reality and just what she was looking at.
And I suppose also just, again, this contrast of textures in a novel. If you're writing about a harsh subject, I sometimes think that's more reason to have beauty in there as well, because it's unexpected, but it juxtaposes and the contrast makes both things brighter.
Yeah, it was gorgeous. I love poetic language, and I just found the alliteration and everything. I was like, this is lovely.
Thank you.
So there's one more question. Rebecca, do you want to ask this one?
Yes. So one person wanted to know the cowboy boots. What was the significance of them, or was there a significance?
Not really. I think it was, sometimes when you're writing, things just fly in and you've got no idea why they've come into your head, or it's like you're, colours are kind of stitching themselves together. So I guess it was just, they might have been in a charity shop. They're not particularly fashionable anymore, cowboy boots. But there's also something a bit gung-ho about them, and a bit they've got a bit of stature, they've got heels. So you know what it's like. I mean, I'm quite tall, so I don't really wear high heels, but I've got blocky boots. And when you put them on, suited and booted, there's that sense of you carry yourself in a different way. So maybe subliminally there was, it wasn't carpet slippers that she chose. It was something that's got a bit of spark about them, in a sense that this girl means business, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah,
but I'm only saying that because I've been asked about it. I didn't choose them because of that.
But that's it. Maybe it was it was all subliminal, that this was all going on in the back of your head. And actually, no, this wasn't, we weren't asked to ask this. Not that anyone knows we're talking to you anyway, but Shirley, Shirley was her therapist? Is that her name?
Shirley.
Her tattoo, her swallow tattoo, was there a significance to the fact that it was a swallow?
Not really, no. Why are you asking?
Someone found out, or according to the internet, a swallow tattoo can be a sign of having been in prison in Scotland. are in certain prisons in
I
Scotland.
did not know that.
Really? We read into that so much. We were like, oh my God, Shirley. Like,
Shirley
the talking
Becerra
about.
as well.
I loved that. I love that. See, when I did, I never said that at the start, but I did a creative writing master's, like after I'd left the police when my girls were wee. And that was really when the idea of all the stories I had became a bigger piece and became a novel. But you would sit in workshops and, firstly, like having people take your work seriously when you've just been like, mum's guilty secret, writing away and feeling stupid. That was something. But you'd have folk giving motivations to your character. And I'd be sitting thinking, I never thought that when I wrote it. And initially I would think, I've written it wrong. They haven't got what I was trying to say. And then the more I thought about it, it's like, that's the beauty of books, isn't it? They go out into the world. I have no idea who's going to read them or what they're going to take from them. And I think that's a strength because it's how a reader connects with writing. If they see something in it that they're like, oh yeah, that means something, or I get that, or you create another narrative that the writer hadn't even thought about. So I love that.
Yeah.
I'm going to claim it now, okay? So erase this bit.
Yeah, there you go.
And I'm going to say that now.
The next time you're asked about it, it was totally intentional.
Yes, I considered it long and hard.
Yeah.
I think probably it was just a metaphor for freedom, a bird flying and that sort of liberation sort of thing. But yeah, because I think when you're thinking about some themes when you're writing and you're searching for an image, that something that relates to the theme will be closer to the surface of your head because that's what you're thinking about. But no, I didn't know about the prison. I'll tell you a funny thing that I also didn't know. I was doing a talk at Wigton Book Festival, and obviously I read the scene about Wigton Book Festival, and the guy that was interviewing me was a BBC journalist for that area, so he'd obviously done his homework. And at the end he said, so did you check and see if there was a Swedish crime writer called Marta Karlsson? Because you remember that there's a scene where Collie and the doggy meet, and this woman gives her a ticket for her gothic crime event. And I said, no, is there a Swedish writer called Marta Karlsson? I should probably have checked that. And he said, no, but there is an aging Swedish porn star called Marta Karlsson. And my husband looked it up for me for research.
Did you know that?
I invented that name. Bloody exists. So,
oh my God, that's hilarious.
And also scary.
We'll assume that was not a subliminal idea. That was not
We'll all be instantly Googling now the second we log off.
Apparently she's pretty elderly, so maybe
maybe she has a swallow tattoo as well. And it's all
we're going meta now.
Oh my God. Brilliant.
That's hilarious.
This has
that
been
is
excellent. Yeah.
I enjoyed that information though. That's really
I overshared at the end.
Not at all. No. We're all about the oversharing here.
These are the kind of things that really make discussion just the extra bit that you don't expect.
As Marta said.
When is that festival actually on?
Sorry?
That festival is real, isn't it?
Yeah. September to October. September through October.
We'll have to organise.
Wow.
I loved, like, when you came across that, I was like, oh my God, why is there nothing like that around here? I love that idea so much, and the fact that a place has made it that's its identity is.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, it's full of bookshops. It's great, brilliant.
Yeah, that's definitely something to aim for later in 2023.
Oh my God, I'm actually praying.
Well, they were all of our burning questions. Obviously, we went into kind of a bit more discussion and stuff within the group, and like people loved the fact there was so much to discuss in it. But yeah, I suppose when we asked them like what were the specific things that you'd love to know from the author, they were the main ones.
It's just, this has been a brilliant experience because it's, you go and do book talks and you get the odd question at the end, but in the main you're talking about what you think people want to know. So this has been really nice that folk have read the book already and then have questions about it, because it's made me think about, well, why did I make those choices about some things. And for me, creative stuff is like you sort of start in the middle and you work out and then you double back, and so it's by necessity all your choices aren't always considered. Sometimes you make them fit, or sometimes you you go back and you fill things in because it tightens up a theme or something. And other times things have just popped up and you've got no idea why.
So are you writing anything at the moment? Is there anything in the pipeline that we could hint at for people?
I'm about 70,000 words into another book. It's provisionally called Tenement, and it's set in the East End of Glasgow, and it's about a young lad who's just going from primary to secondary school, and he's kind of on the cusp of, he's been in trouble with social work, with the police, he's not got a great home life, and something happens that basically puts him on a trajectory where he ends up not staying with his mum anymore and being fostered and things. And I kind of wanted to look at these moments in life where the road diverges and choices are made that you don't always have control over, but it's about the people that then guide you or lead you or put you down. Or I'm working on it. I'm not sure when it'll be finished or quite how it'll turn out, but that's the idea.
It sounds very interesting. Yeah.
Thank you so much. This has been
my
so
pleasure.
enjoyable.
That's really
lovely.
Good. And thank you for picking Paper Cup. I really appreciate it.
So we hope that you enjoyed your surprise guest. We absolutely had a lovely time chatting to Karen. Like, she is so lovely, and took time out of her evening to come and speak with us about her book.
So all that is left to do at this point is announce February's read-along book.
Yes, our book for February is called Other Parents by Sarah Stovall. I'm going to take a random stab at the surname.
This could be another Jodie Picoult thing now.
I could be pronouncing it difficultly. Yeah, I could be pronouncing her name differently in a week. Come back to me on that one.
Yeah.
But the blurb for this book is, Rachel Saunders knows gossip is the price you pay for a rural lifestyle and outstanding schools. The latest town scandal is her divorce and the fact that her new girlfriend has moved into the family home. Laura Spence lives in a pokey bedsit on the wrong side of town. She and her son Max don't really belong, and his violent tantrums are threatening to expose the very thing she's trying to hide. When the local school introduces a new inclusive curriculum, Rachel and Laura find themselves on opposite sides of a fearsome debate. But the problem with having your nose in everyone else's business is that you often miss what is happening in your own home.
Ooh, it sounds
excellent.
Interesting. And again, just to reiterate, other than the blurb, we know nothing about this book. We are very much going in blind, and we cannot wait to get reading this.
So our guideline for you for reading this book is to finish it up on the 24th of February, and our reading schedule went down a treat with people for Paper Cup. So we're going to replicate that and provide you with a reading schedule for this book. The same way that we did for Paper Cup, we will have one or both of us reading this book on the last week before we open up the chats. Our polls and question boxes and group chats will be opened that weekend, and we look forward to hearing from you. If you want to put your name down already, if you're an eager beaver, just send us a DM and let us know that you want to be included, because I do make a list of anyone that gets in contact before we put up the polls. And then as we come closer to that week and during that week where we are doing the read along, polls will be put up where you can opt in to be added to the group chat as well. So keep an eye out for those. All of this then is happening over on our Instagram page, which is at Another Chapter Podcast, with full stops between all of those words.
And Sinead, thank you so much for joining us for our read-along episode, and we can't wait to see you in Chapter 8. Thank you so much for listening to this edition of Another Chapter Podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and share to keep the book conversation going. Thank you to Helen Becerra for the graphics, Mark Neville for the mixing, and to each of our contributors. Music is Make It Work by All Good Folks.
Don't forget to follow along on Instagram at Another Chapter Podcast. We'll see you there.